Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting right into something that shapes how you learn without you even realizing it. Your epistemological beliefs. Think of it as your personal theory about what knowledge is and how learning happens.
Exactly. And what's, fascinating is that your underlying ideas about knowledge influence everything from like how you study for a test to how you make sense of the news.
Right.
The research we're looking at today digs into these beliefs, how they might change over time, and the real impact they actually have on your learning.
So the goal of this deep dive is to really understand these core ideas about epistemological beliefs. Why should you care? Well, because they're fundamental to your learning journey.
Yeah.
And we'll also touch on some of the big questions researchers are, still exploring in this area. Okay, let's unpack this. How do researchers even begin to define and study these beliefs?
Well, it's interesting because the field started, in philosophy, with thinkers trying to define what true and universal knowledge really is. But the kind of research we're focusing on today in psychology takes a different approach. It looks at what you believe about knowledge. For example, how certain do you think knowledge is? Where do you think it comes from?
Hmm.
How do you think different pieces of information relate to each other? It's all about your personal perspective on knowing.
So instead of debating the ultimate truth, we're looking at your internal sense of what knowledge is like.
Precisely. And how researchers think about these beliefs often depends on what specific learning challenges they're trying to understand.
Ah.
For instance, if a researcher is trying to figure out why students struggle with physics, they might focus on certain beliefs that seem to, hold those students back.
Like what kind of beliefs?
They might find that some students believe that physics knowledge is just a bunch of disconnected formulas you have to memorize, or that learning physics should click instantly.
Right, like magic.
Yeah, or even that only certain smart people can really grasp it. You might hear these researchers talk about knowledge in pieces, or a student having a mere basket of facts in their head. The idea that only geniuses can truly understand math, or a belief in a fixed ability to learn, those are other examples of beliefs that some researchers see as, less helpful for mastering certain subjects. So these are like potential roadblocks in your learning.
So these simpler descriptions of beliefs are often used when trying to solve specific learning problems in particular subjects. Makes sense.
Exactly. But then you have researchers who are interested in the bigger picture of how our thinking about knowledge evolves as we mature intellectually.
Okay.
These researchers, like Perry, Kitchener, and King, and Blinky and her colleagues, have developed more comprehensive models to describe these shifts. These are really influential frameworks for understanding how our relationship with knowledge changes.
Okay, let's start with Perry's model then. What did his research uncover?
William Perry's work with college students, mostly at Harvard, suggested that they go through about 9 different positions in how they view knowledge. It's kind of like a journey that starts with a very black and white view of the world. In the early positions, students tend to see knowledge as absolute, coming directly from authority figures like their professors.
You had a quote from one of his students that really brought this idea to life.
Yes, it was quite telling. The student said, when I went to my first lecture, what the man said was just like God's word. I believed everything he said because he's a professor and he's a Harvard professor, and this was a respected position.
Wow.
That really captures that initial unquestioning trust in authority as the sole source of truth. So the key insight here is that some learners initially see knowledge as simply being transmitted from experts.
Like God's word, that really emphasizes the feeling of absolute certainty. So what happens as students move through Perry's positions? Does it stay that way?
No, definitely not. As they encounter different viewpoints in their studies and interact with a wider range of ideas, they begin to realize that, not everyone agrees.
The real world hits.
Kind of. Initially, they might explain these differing opinions by thinking that some authorities are incompetent, or maybe are deliberately making things confusing so students can figure out the real answer themselves.
Okay.
Eventually, they start to accept that some uncertainty is just part of knowledge, though they might still hope that the experts will eventually reveal the definitive answer. So they're starting to grapple with the idea that knowledge isn't always clear-cut.
They're moving away from that initial certainty, but aren't quite comfortable with the ambiguity yet.
Right. As they develop further, they begin to embrace the idea that knowledge can be complex and even a bit fuzzy. They start to see that knowledge isn't just out there waiting to be discovered, but is something they actively construct through their own reasoning.
That sounds like a big shift.
It is. One student in Perry's research had a really insightful moment about this.
What was the realization?
They said, there was one thing I expected. I expected that when I got to Harvard, I came up here expecting Harvard would teach me one universal truth. Pause. Took me quite a while to figure out that if I was going for a universal truth or something to believe in, it had to come within me.
Powerful.
Yeah. This marks a significant shift from relying solely on external authorities to recognizing the importance of their own internal understanding. So a key takeaway from Perry is this move from seeing knowledge as external and absolute to internal and constructed.
That's a huge step, realizing you have to be an active participant in building your own understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the time they're seniors, Perry's model suggests that many students are learning to live with ongoing uncertainty and are making commitments to certain beliefs based on their own evaluation, while still being open to revising those beliefs as new information comes along.
So it's ongoing.
It becomes an ongoing process of engagement with knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, so Perry gives us this picture of a journey in how college students think about knowledge. Now, how does Kitchener and King's reflective judgment model compare? Is it similar?
Well, Karen Kitchener and Patricia King also focused on how people's thinking about knowledge develops, but they were particularly interested in how individuals justify their beliefs, especially when dealing with ill-structured problems.
Ill-structured problems.
Yeah, issues that don't have simple, definitive answers. Think about things like climate change solutions or the causes of poverty.
Got it. Complex stuff.
Exactly. Their model outlines 7 stages in how people reason about knowledge and reality.
7 stages? That sounds quite detailed. What are some of the main changes you see as people move through these stages?
In the early stages, much like Perry's initial positions, knowledge is seen as absolute and directly given by authorities. Justification for beliefs is pretty straightforward. You believe it because an authority figure told you so.
Like the textbook example.
Right. Someone in these early stages might justify their belief in a particular historical event simply because their textbook said it happened that way. The source is the proof.
Okay.
As people progress, they start to realize that there can be uncertainty, but they often believe that eventually the absolute truth will be uncovered. Justification at this point might involve waiting for more expert opinions or future research to reveal the final answer.
Still hoping for that one right answer.
Yeah. Then, in the middle stages, there's a shift towards seeing knowledge as more subjective. Everyone has their own opinion, and there's no real objective way to say who's right. Justification becomes very personal. This is what I believe.
So it goes from there's one right answer to my opinion is as good as anyone else's, almost like a pendulum swing.
That's a common characteristic of those middle stages, yeah.
Mm.
But Kitchener and King's model goes further. In the highest stages, individuals start to see knowledge as something that's constructed through a process of inquiry.
Inquiry. So active investigation.
Yes. While they understand that absolute certainty might not be attainable, they also recognize that some ways of knowing and some justifications are more reasonable and better supported by evidence than others.
So it's not just anything goes.
Not at all. They understand that our current understanding is always evolving and is based on the best available information.
You had an example in the notes about explaining the pyramids that really illustrated this higher level thinking.
Yes, when someone in the later stages of reflective judgment is asked about the origins of the pyramids, they don't offer a definitive "this is how it happened" answer. Instead, they might talk about different theories and explain why some are more or less likely based on the available archaeological evidence and historical context.
So they weigh the evidence.
Exactly. They understand that our knowledge is based on reasoned judgment rather than absolute proof. So the key insight here is the development of more sophisticated ways of justifying beliefs, especially in the face of uncertainty.
That makes a lot of sense. And their research indicates that this level of sophistication in reflective judgment tends to increase with age and education, and it generally follows a predictable sequence.
That's a key finding from their long-term studies, yes.
Okay. Now let's shift our focus to the work of Mary Belenky and her colleagues on women's ways of knowing. Their research offers a different, and you said very important, perspective on how we come to understand knowledge. How is their approach different? What were they investigating?
Well, Belenky and her team were specifically interested in understanding how women think about knowledge, reality, and authority. They felt the previous models, like Perry's, were largely based on studies of men and might not fully capture the experiences and perspectives of women.
That's a really important point.
It is. Their work also considered the influence of social context and personal experience on how women develop their ways of knowing.
So they focused on in-depth interviews with women to understand their perspectives on knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Through extensive interviews with 135 women, they identified 5 different epistemological perspectives: silence, received knowledge, subjective knowledge, procedural knowledge, and constructed knowledge.
5 perspectives.
Yeah, and they emphasize that while there's a general trend towards more complex perspectives, it's not necessarily a rigid stage model like Kitchener and King's. Instead, these perspectives represent different ways of relating to knowledge.
Okay, let's walk through some of these perspectives. What does silence entail?
Silence describes women who feel powerless and voiceless, believing that all real knowledge comes from external authorities, and they themselves have no capacity to understand or create it. It's a really profound lack of confidence in their own knowing.
Wow. And received knowledge.
In received knowledge, women see themselves as capable of learning by listening to and absorbing information from authorities, but they don't see themselves as independent thinkers or generators of knowledge.
Yeah.
They can take it in, but not create it.
Okay. There was a really powerful quote from a woman who described these early perspectives, wasn't there?
Yes, very much so. She said, "I never used to think of myself as smart. I really didn't. Most people have never really said anything about it because I'm quiet. My mother doesn't know how smart I am. My sister never thought I was very intelligent. I never had evidence of it before. So coming here to college, I see myself reflected by other people, what they think of me. It really boosted my ego. I need that, I think."
That's really striking, the idea that their own intelligence isn't even something they recognize internally until it's reflected back to them by others.
It really highlights how deeply intertwined beliefs about self and beliefs about knowledge can be. That's a key insight from their work.
Absolutely. What about subjective knowledge?
In subjective knowledge, women begin to value their own inner voice, intuition, and personal experience as valid sources of knowledge. They might see knowledge as more personal and private, something that comes from their own feelings and gut instincts.
So more internal focus now.
Definitely. One woman described it this way: "I think what one person sees to be a fact is not necessarily a fact in the eyes of another. So I tend to weigh anything in light of how I feel about it. I am only searching for what is valid for me. I only know for myself. This is truth for me. I believe in myself and my powers."
Interesting.
So the key shift here is an increasing trust in their own internal authority.
So it's a move towards valuing personal experience and intuition as legitimate ways of knowing. What about the more complex perspectives? Procedural and constructed.
Right. Women in procedural knowledge focus on learning and applying objective procedures and methods for gaining and evaluating knowledge. They learn the rules of the game for different disciplines, you could say.
Okay, mastering the methods.
Yes. Then constructed knowledge represents a further integration, where women appreciate both objective and subjective ways of knowing. They understand that knowledge is often complex, contextual, and actively constructed. They get the big picture.
So they can use both logic and intuition and see how they fit together.
Exactly. They recognize that knowledge isn't absolute and often involves using models that are simpler than the real world. One quote illustrated this well: "In science, you don't really want to say that something's true. You realize that you're dealing with a model. Our models are always simpler than the real world."
Acknowledging limitations.
Yes, and another woman talked about understanding how different academic disciplines are interconnected and offer different lenses on the same issues.
The key insight here is the ability to integrate different ways of knowing and to understand the nuanced and constructed nature of knowledge.
It sounds like these later perspectives involve a much more sophisticated understanding of how knowledge is created and validated, appreciating different approaches and the limitations of any single perspective.
Exactly. And while Belenky and her colleagues focus specifically on women, they consciously suggest that these perspectives might not be exclusive to women.
Though they believe these ways of knowing might be more prominent among women due to their social and relational experiences. Their work really broadened our understanding of epistemological beliefs by highlighting the crucial interplay between our beliefs about ourselves, about authority, and about the nature of knowledge itself.
These different models, Perry, Kitchener and King, Belenky, et al., they give us such valuable frameworks for understanding how our beliefs about knowledge develop. Now, let's think about how these beliefs actually affect our learning. Does it really matter what we believe about knowledge when it comes to how we learn effectively?
Oh, absolutely. A wealth of research shows that your epistemological beliefs have a profound impact on how actively you engage in learning, how persistent you are when faced with challenges, how well you understand complex information, and how you approach and solve problems that don't have straightforward answers.
Okay, let's break that down. How do our beliefs about knowledge influence how actively we engage with the learning process? You mentioned passivity earlier.
Right. One belief that can really hinder active engagement is the idea that learning is a passive process, that you just sit and absorb information without needing to actively question, analyze, or seek clarification. Patricia McDevitt's research on beliefs about listening in college lectures is very revealing here.
What did she find?
She found that only a small fraction of students, around 15%, typically ask professors clarifying questions during lectures.
That's surprisingly low. Why do you think that is?
Well, it often ties back to those earlier epistemological perspectives we discussed. If you believe that knowledge is absolute and resides solely with the authority figure, like in Blanky et al.'s silence and received knowledge perspectives, you're less likely to see yourself as having the right or need to question or challenge what's being said. You might think your role is just to listen and remember. The anecdote about Angela, who felt completely lost when her professor expected original thinking instead of just providing answers, really illustrates this disconnect. If you believe learning is just about receiving answers, then being asked to generate your own understanding can feel, well, overwhelming.
Right. If you see yourself as just an empty vessel to be filled, then actively participating in constructing knowledge feels outside your role. It's scary.
Exactly. And this passive approach isn't just limited to lectures. Research on beliefs about historical knowledge shows that less effective learners tend to see history as just a collection of facts to be passively accepted.
Just memorize the dates.
Pretty much. Rather than recognizing that historical accounts are interpretations of past events, often shaped by different perspectives and evidence. So a more sophisticated understanding of history involves recognizing it's not just about memorizing dates, but about actively interpreting evidence and understanding different viewpoints.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, what about persistence? How do our underlying beliefs about knowledge affect our ability to stick with challenging tasks?
There are a couple of key beliefs at play here. One is your belief about whether your intelligence and abilities are fixed or can grow. Carol Dweck's work on fixed versus growth mindsets is really relevant here.
Ah, yes, the growth mindset.
Right. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe your abilities are largely set in stone. So when you encounter a difficult task, you might see it as proof of your limitations and be more likely to give up. You're thinking, I'm just not good at this.
Because the focus becomes on demonstrating innate ability rather than developing it. You don't want to look dumb.
Precisely.
Ah.
On the other hand, if you have a growth mindset, you believe that your abilities can be developed through effort and learning. You're more likely to see challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, and you'll persist through difficulties, trying different strategies.
Okay.
So your underlying belief about the malleability of your own abilities is crucial for persistence.
That really resonates. If I believe I can improve, I'm definitely more willing to put in the effort when things get tough. What's the other belief related to persistence?
It's your belief about how quickly learning should happen, whether you think you should grasp things instantly or whether you accept that it's often a gradual process.
The quick learning idea again.
Yeah. Alan Schoenfeld's work with math students found that many believe math problems should be solvable very quickly, like within just a few minutes. And if it takes longer, it's a sign you're just not good at it.
Which is often not true for complex problems.
Exactly. This belief can obviously lead to giving up prematurely on challenging problems. Interestingly, some research, including my own, has shown that a strong belief in quick learning can actually be a negative predictor of academic success, like GPA, even after controlling for intelligence.
Wow,
Right.
really? So believing learning should be fast holds you back.
It seems so. The less students believe that learning should be quick, the better they tend to perform. So patience and the willingness to engage with material over time are really important.
Wow, that's a powerful connection. It suggests that embracing the struggle and allowing for a more gradual learning curve is really key for achievement. Now let's talk about how our epistemological beliefs affect how well we understand what we read.
Right, reading comprehension. Several beliefs come into play here. For some individuals, a fundamental belief about reading is simply memorizing words.
Just decoding.
Yeah. Research with adult learners who struggle with literacy has highlighted how this belief can be a major obstacle to developing effective reading comprehension. They don't get past the word level.
Okay.
Then there's the belief that reading to learn is just about memorizing facts. Richard Ryan's research found that students who tend to think in more black and white terms, that dualistic thinking we mentioned, are more likely to feel they understand something if they can recall basic facts. Whereas students with more nuanced views of knowledge, the relativistic thinkers, focus more on their ability to apply and connect those facts.
So their view of what constitutes understanding is tied to their epistemological beliefs.
Exactly. The very definition of what it means to understand something you've read differs.
Fascinating.
And the belief that reading should be quick and should reveal definitive, certain information can also hinder comprehension, especially when you're dealing with complex texts that present tentative findings or multiple perspectives.
Like scientific papers or complex news articles.
Precisely. Research has shown that individuals who strongly believe in quick learning tend to have poorer comprehension of such passages and are often overconfident in their level of understanding.
Overconfident? Why?
Because they think they got it quickly, even if they miss the nuances. They might also distort information that is uncertain or tentative to fit their pre-existing belief that knowledge should be clear and absolute.
They're almost forcing the text to conform to their expectations of what knowledge should be like.
Exactly. Finally, your beliefs about how knowledge is organized, whether you see it as a collection of isolated facts or as an interconnected web of ideas, also significantly impacts reading comprehension, particularly in subjects like science and math.
The knowledge in pieces idea again.
Right. If you view knowledge as just a bunch of separate bits of information, it's much harder to grasp underlying concepts like, say, Ohm's law or the principles of thermodynamics, which require understanding the relationships between different ideas.
You can't just memorize the formula, you need to know how it connects.
Precisely. Researchers have described this as the difference between static believers, who see learning science as memorizing individual facts, and dynamic believers, who see it as actively putting together a puzzle where the pieces might not always fit together easily at first.
I like that puzzle-solving analogy.
Me too. It really captures the active and integrated nature of understanding complex subjects.
Okay, this connects back to the idea of ill-structured problems too, right? How do beliefs affect tackling those ambiguous situations?
Absolutely. Your epistemological beliefs strongly relate to how you cope with problems that have multiple possible solutions or maybe even no clear single answer. Deanna Kuhn's research on how people justify their arguments is a great example.
What'd she find?
She identified different levels of epistemological understanding based on how people justify their views on social issues, like why prisoners reoffend.
Okay.
Absolutists believe in definite causes and look for simple proof. Multiplists acknowledge different views but see them all as equally valid opinions, making reasoned judgment impossible. Then evaluatists understand that while different perspectives exist, some are better supported by evidence and reason than others. They can actually weigh arguments.
So the evaluativist sounds like Kitchener and King's higher stages.
Very similar idea, yes. They can handle the complexity without resorting to anything goes. Spiro and colleagues' research on medical expertise also touches on this.
How so?
They found that some medical students tend to oversimplify complex cases. They fail to recognize the inherently ill-structured nature of much medical knowledge, like how the same illness can present with different symptoms in different people.
You want a simple checklist, maybe?
Kind of. These students struggle when faced with the real-world messiness. Spiro's group emphasizes using multiple analogies or perspectives to understand complex concepts, rather than relying on just one simple explanation that might be misleading.
Like the muscle analogies you mentioned.
Exactly. Thinking of a muscle only like a rowing crew pulling together misses key aspects. You might need to also think about turnbuckles or finger handcuffs to grasp different facets of how muscles actually function. Using multiple, even contrasting models helps build a richer, more flexible understanding suitable for ill-structured domains.
It really does seem like having more sophisticated epistemological beliefs, understanding that knowledge can be complex, tentative, and actively constructed, is crucial for engaging in deeper learning and tackling real-world challenges.
That's a key point. If all learning required was simple memorization of unchanging facts, these underlying beliefs might not matter as much. But in today's complex world, well, the ability to think critically, integrate diverse information, and navigate uncertainty is absolutely essential.
Which then leads us back to the fundamental question, how do these crucial beliefs actually develop?
Right. So we've established that these beliefs are important, but where do they come from and how do they change over time?
Yeah, what does the research say?
Well, As I said, this is a really intricate area, and our understanding is still evolving. As we discussed earlier, Perry, Kitchener, and King are the primary researchers who have offered systematic accounts of this development.
Okay.
Perry's work suggested a progression through different ways of viewing knowledge, those positions, but he didn't necessarily see them as rigid, fixed stages.
Right, more like perspectives.
Yeah. And interestingly, studies that have tried to replicate Perry's findings have shown that students progress at different rates and may not always follow the exact sequence he outlined.
And Kitchener and King's reflective judgment model is considered a stage model, correct? You mentioned longitudinal evidence.
Yes, their long-term research provides evidence for a relatively consistent and sequential progression through the 7 stages of reflective judgment. And they found that this development is linked to both age and level of education.
So people tend to move through the stages in order, but maybe at different speeds.
That seems to be the pattern, yes.
Okay, so there does seem to be evidence for a general developmental trend in how we think about knowledge. But the notes also mention that there are different perspectives or camps of thought on how to interpret this development. What are those different viewpoints?
Essentially, there are 2 main ways researchers interpret this development. One perspective, held by researchers like Boyes and Chandler, connects reaching the higher levels of epistemological understanding to Piaget's theory of cognitive development.
Piaget stages, okay.
Specifically the stage of formal operations that typically develops in adolescence. They argue that as adolescents develop more abstract reasoning skills, they go through a transition from a naive belief in absolute knowledge, naive realism, to a period of skepticism or maybe dogmatism, and then eventually to a more nuanced post-skeptical relativism. They even suggest that college students might be revisiting and solidifying these levels of thinking rather than encountering them for the first time.
So this view sees the development of epistemological beliefs as closely tied to the broader cognitive development that happens during adolescence. What's the other main perspective?
The other viewpoint sees the highest levels of epistemological thinking, like reflective judgment or constructed knowing, as representing a post-formal operational stage of cognitive development.
Beyond formal operations.
Yes, thinking that goes beyond the logical reasoning emphasized by Piaget. This perspective argues that truly sophisticated thinking about knowledge requires abilities like, well, epistemological reasoning itself, understanding multiple perspectives, relativism, and being able to synthesize opposing viewpoints, dialectical thinking. They see these as going beyond formal logic.
So they see it as a further stage of intellectual growth, maybe in adulthood.
Exactly. Something that builds upon but goes beyond adolescent cognitive development. It's important to note that these 2 interpretations haven't been fully integrated or reconciled within the field. There's still debate.
It sounds like there's still an ongoing debate about whether the development of these beliefs is primarily driven by general cognitive maturation in adolescence, or if it represents a distinct and further stage of intellectual growth in adulthood.
Exactly. And my own research, which looked at the epistemological beliefs of high school students at different grade levels, showed some interesting, though maybe preliminary trends.
What did you find there?
We found that beliefs in simple knowledge, certain knowledge, and quick learning tended to decrease as students progressed from freshman to senior year.
So some development seems to happen in high school.
It appears so,
Yeah.
but because this was a cross-sectional study, meaning we looked at different groups of students at one point in time, not the same students followed over time. We have to be cautious.
Ah, right. Correlation, not necessarily causation over time for individuals.
Exactly. It could also be due to other factors, like maybe the students who hold less sophisticated beliefs are more likely to drop out before senior year, something called attrition. We're actually conducting longer-term studies now to try and get a clearer picture of how these beliefs change over time within individuals.
So overall, the development of epistemological beliefs is a really interesting and still actively researched area.
Definitely, we're still figuring out the full picture.
It definitely sounds like we're still in the process of understanding all the nuances of how these beliefs evolve. Now let's think about what factors might actually shape these beliefs in the first place. What influences how we come to think about knowledge and learning the way we do?
Well, Richard Anderson argued quite directly that our epistemological beliefs are a product of 2 main influences: our home environment and our experiences with formal education.
Home and school.
Right. The beliefs held by our parents, which are shaped by their own educational backgrounds and life experiences, likely play a significant role in shaping our early views on knowledge and learning. And then later on, our teachers and the educational settings we encounter become really important in further shaping these beliefs.
That makes intuitive sense. We absorb a lot from our early family life, and then our time in school has a major impact as well. But the notes also mention something about an enigma concerning the different roles of education and culture. What's the mystery there?
The really challenging part is trying to disentangle the specific effects of formal education from the broader cultural influences that surround us,
Hmm.
which of course includes the culture that exists within educational settings themselves.
Ah, okay. Culture in the classroom, too.
Right. Researchers and educators are very interested in understanding how both these more immediate educational factors and the wider cultural context contribute to the development of our epistemological beliefs. It's tricky to separate.
Let's start by looking at the influence of education itself, then. What does the research suggest about how our experiences in school might shape our beliefs about knowledge?
Well, there's evidence to suggest that the historical approaches and underlying philosophies within education have, perhaps unintentionally, fostered certain less sophisticated epistemological beliefs.
Like how?
For example, in science education, the historical influence of logical positivism, the idea that knowledge comes primarily from direct observation and empirical evidence, might have inadvertently led to an emphasis on students as passive observers and recipients of facts.
Like the received knowledge idea again.
Exactly, aligning with that belief in passive learning. In mathematics education, Alan Schoenfeld talks about what he calls the absorption model of teaching, where the goal is seen as transmitting a fixed body of mathematical knowledge for students to passively absorb and memorize.
That idea of teachers just pouring knowledge into students' heads sounds like a very traditional approach. Do you think some elements of that still persist in education today?
I think they can, yeah. Walker's analysis of the history of language arts teaching in Canada is particularly insightful here. He found that at one time, memorizing grammatical terminology was considered the science of language.
Really?
Yeah, based on a belief in one single correct way of speaking and writing. The focus was on rote memorization and abstract grammatical rules as a form of mental exercise.
Mental exercise.
Yeah,
Like lifting weights for the brain.
kind of. And interestingly, making learning enjoyable or relevant was even seen as potentially counterproductive to this goal.
Wow, that's backward from today's perspective.
Completely. Walker cautions modern language arts teachers to be aware of these underlying beliefs that might still influence their teaching, especially when they teach grammar in a very rule-based, deductive way, without connecting it to real communication.
So even the way we teach specific subjects can carry with it certain implicit messages about what knowledge is and how you acquire it.
Exactly. And there's also more direct evidence of instructional practices that seem to inadvertently promote less helpful beliefs about knowledge.
Hmm.
Schoenfeld's detailed case study of a high school geometry class is a prime example.
What happened there?
It heavily emphasized memorizing proofs just for an exam, rather than focusing on the underlying mathematical reasoning. The goal became quick recall for the test, not deep conceptual understanding.
Learning for the test, not for understanding.
Sadly, yes. Similarly, Rigdon and Tobias's observations of introductory college science courses found an overemphasis on memorizing isolated facts with single correct answers, without much opportunity for students to ask why, or to explore the connections between different concepts.
It sounds like some teaching methods, even with good intentions, might unintentionally reinforce the idea that learning is mostly about memorizing simple, certain facts that are handed down by an authority figure.
Unfortunately, that does seem to be the case in some educational settings. However, it's not all negative.
Oh, good.
Some research has shown that even without explicitly focusing on students' beliefs about knowledge, some college teachers naturally foster more sophisticated beliefs simply by emphasizing critical thinking, encouraging open discussion, and highlighting the dynamic and evolving nature of knowledge in their fields.
That's encouraging to hear that some educators are naturally promoting these deeper ways of thinking without necessarily even labeling it as epistemological development.
Right. It can be part of good teaching practice.
The notes also included some recommendations for what philosophically sound instruction might look like. What are some of those key principles?
Well, synthesizing the research in this area suggests a few important approaches. First, instruction should consistently emphasize that learning is an active, personal process of constructing understanding. Hands-on experiences and problem-solving really help here.
Active learning.
Yes. Second, it's crucial to communicate to students that higher-level learning often involves intellectual struggle. And importantly, this struggle should be framed as a positive challenge that requires perseverance and trying different strategies, rather than as a sign of personal inadequacy or failure.
Normalizing the struggle.
Exactly. Teachers can help students learn to distinguish between productive confusion, the kind that leads to deeper understanding, and unproductive frustration, where they are simply lost and need different support.
So it's about reframing challenges as learning opportunities and encouraging that puzzle-solving mindset we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Third, research suggests that emphasizing that teachers genuinely care about student learning can have a surprisingly powerful impact.
Just showing you care.
Yeah, it fosters a belief that learning is valuable and important. And finally, instruction should actively convey learning as a process of seeing the evolving connections between different ideas and applying knowledge in a variety of contexts. This highlights the dynamic and interconnected nature of knowledge.
Connecting the dots.
Right. Baxter-Magolda's recommendations from her study of college students align well with these points. She emphasizes starting with students' existing knowledge, encouraging collaborative effort in tackling complex problems, and acknowledging the emotional aspects of learning, with professors showing genuine regard for their students.
These recommendations seem to focus on creating a more student-centered, active, and supportive learning environment that implicitly encourages the development of more sophisticated epistemological beliefs. Now, let's shift to the influence of factors outside of the formal classroom. How do our broader cultural context and our home environment play a role?
This is where the picture gets even more complex, maybe even contentious sometimes. There's the potential for significant differences and even conflict between the epistemological beliefs that might be promoted in school and those that are prevalent at home or within a student's broader cultural community.
Conflict between home and school values.
Potentially. Xu Jingpai's work highlights that different cultural groups might have fundamentally different perspectives on the nature of learning. For example, mainstream American schooling often emphasizes active participation, individual questioning, public debate, with individual achievement as a primary goal.
Okay.
In contrast, some other cultural traditions, Paya mentions groups like some Asian Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, might place a greater emphasis on learning through, say, quiet observation, imitation of elders or experts, respect for authority, and maybe a focus on group harmony and collective achievement rather than individual spotlight.
So what's valued in learning and how learning is approached can vary quite significantly across different cultural backgrounds. That seems really important for educators to understand.
Absolutely. And this raises a really critical question about how we even define and study epistemological beliefs across diverse cultures. Pei points out the limitations of using a simple Western framework, such as the idea of an internal versus external locus of control.
Like, who's in control of your learning?
Right. That simple dichotomy might not fit well when considering different cultural worldviews. For instance, the deep connection to nature and the sense of being part of a larger whole in many Native American cultures challenges the Western binary of internal human agency versus separate external forces.
Yeah, that doesn't fit neatly.
Similarly, the strong emphasis on family values, interdependence, and respect for tradition in many Asian and Asian American cultures complicates the Western focus on individual autonomy and challenging authority. It makes us question whether mainstream research, often rooted in Western perspectives, has sometimes misunderstood or misrepresented the epistemological viewpoints of other cultures.
It sounds like we need to be really cautious about imposing our own cultural assumptions when we're trying to understand how different groups think about knowledge and learning. It's not a one-size-fits-all model.
Exactly. It requires cultural sensitivity and maybe different research approaches. My own research, which compared the epistemological beliefs of adults with varying levels of education, but within the same broader U.S. culture, offered some interesting insights into how home life and formal education might interact, though.
What did that study suggest?
We found that background factors, such as a person's age and whether they had opportunities for intellectual discussions with their parents growing up, were more strongly associated with their beliefs about the process of learning itself.
Like quick learning or fixed ability?
Yes, exactly. Beliefs about quick learning and fixed ability seemed more linked to those home background variables. On the other hand, the level of formal education they had attained was a stronger predictor of their beliefs about the nature of knowledge itself.
Like whether knowledge is simple or certain.
Right. Beliefs about simple knowledge and certain knowledge were more strongly predicted by education level.
That's a fascinating distinction, that your early home environment might have a bigger impact on your beliefs about your own learning capabilities, while formal education might more directly shape your views on what knowledge actually is.
It suggests that both our early experiences and our formal schooling play distinct but interconnected roles in shaping our epistemological beliefs. The way these influences interact is likely quite complex and something we're still working to fully understand.
This has been a truly deep dive into a really fundamental aspect of how we all learn and understand the world. It's surprisingly complex. To bring our conversation to a close, what would you say is the most important takeaway for you, our listener?
I think the key thing to remember is that your beliefs about knowledge and learning aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They are powerful and deeply influence how you approach new information, how you deal with intellectual challenges, and ultimately how effectively you learn and continue to grow intellectually throughout your life. They matter daily.
Right. And while the research we've discussed today offers us valuable frameworks for understanding these beliefs, Perry, Kitchener, and King, Belinkie, it's also clear that there are still many unanswered questions, particularly when it comes to how these beliefs develop over time and how they're shaped by the diverse cultural contexts in which we live and learn.
Absolutely. There's still a lot more to explore. And on that note, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Take some time to really reflect on your own underlying assumptions. Where do you acknowledge comes from? How certain do you believe it to be? How quickly do you expect to grasp new ideas?
Turning the lens inward.
Yeah. How might these deeply held beliefs, maybe ones you haven't even articulated before, be subtly shaping your own learning experiences and the way you engage with the world around you? This deep dive into epistemological beliefs is really just the beginning of a fascinating and ongoing exploration into the very nature of how we come to know.